All right, Nathan, thank you so much for being on our show today.
Yeah, thank you. Very gracious. Great to be here with you.
Love it. You have this awesome podcast called Seeking Excellence, and I'm curious, can you just tell us your story about how you got to be where you're at and all that good stuff?
Yeah, for sure. So grew up in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. I just turned 30 last year to give some context on age there. So I know you were saying I was young before this. I'm like, sometimes I feel old, but still pretty young in the Catholic world, especially when it comes to speaking and things like that. But I grew up in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. My dad was actually ended up being baptized the same day as me. I kind of just recently found that out. When I was a baby, and we both baptized in a Lutheran church. His mom was Southern Baptist from Georgia, a strong Black Southern Baptist woman. And then my mom's family was Lutheran. They sent me to a Methodist preschool, and then I started Catholic school in kindergarten. And so when I was 13 in eighth grade, became the first Catholic on either side of my family. So I converted mostly to my Catholic school. And important kind of family context is I was my dad's seventh kid by five different moms. My parents later, when I was in college, freshman in college, ended up getting divorced. My dad was kind of in and out of my life from like 10 to 13, 14. All this is important because we're going to be talking about this today. It's going to come up for sure, talking about masculinity. But I really kind of fell off, totally after I converted. So going into high school in that first year, lost my virginity, started smoking, started drinking, partying, all the things, and just really basically was replicating what I had seen in my older brothers, what I had seen in my dad, just kind of this life of just chasing pleasure and thinking, especially, I think. I really think this kind of comes up with a lot of masculinity stuff too. Is as a young Black man, I was just like an athlete. I was like, this is the life, right? Like you play sports, you hook up, you party, and that's just kind of what it is, and that's kind of what makes you a man. And yeah, just kind of pursued those things. Realized they were very empty. Didn't like it. Didn't like the path that I was on. Could really see that for myself. And so when I got the chance to start touring colleges, I went to Mount St. Mary's University in Maryland, and I was like, wow, these people are, I think, the first joyful people I think may have ever met in my life. And so I was like, maybe if I came here, I could be joyful too. Because I was always somebody that was very smiley, seemed to be happy. And I knew that it was very temporary. I didn't have joy. I didn't have that lasting peace outside of when I was pursuing pleasure and fun. And so I decided to go to the Mount there in Maryland, and yeah, just totally changed my life. And so I started doing Army ROTC, which helped with some discipline that was very much needed at the time and still is today. And really, that was where I learned how to pray. It's where I learned how to evangelize, where I decided to be Catholic and knew why I wanted to be Catholic, not just that I was going to be Catholic because it was basically the only thing in my life, which is kind of why I converted the first time. So yeah, did Army ROTC, became an infantry officer in the Army. After graduation, I went to infantry training, airborne school, ranger school, went up to the 82nd Airborne Division where I served as a platoon leader for 4 years. And one combat deployment to Afghanistan there in 2017, got out, became a parish consultant at Dynamic Catholic, met my wife on Instagram, which is another fun kind of side story, and decided to move to Benedictine College, which is why I'm repping BC today. And I served as a resident director there, mainly to be able to date in person. She was working for Catholic speaker Sarah Swafford at the time in Atchison. And so we dated, fell further in love, decided to get married. Once we were engaged, I moved to Denver, where I started working for Hallow. So I'm a senior partnership executive at Hallow. Started my podcast coming up on 4 years ago, which is pretty crazy. And other things we do, we got married 2 years ago. We had a son about a year ago. So our son Jordan was born last April. And he's awesome. And we started Airbnb in our basement. So we have Airbnb together. I speak and write blogs and articles and podcast and yeah, try to stay as busy as I can.
That's
So it's a lot of
life
stuff
well
for sure.
lived.
Yes, absolutely. Don't want to leave anything on the table. So we're keeping it full. Got another side project that I'm hoping to be able to announce here in about 2 months.
Okay.
Some fun stuff we've been working on. So
Awesome.
yeah,
That's
we keep it
great.
going.
Yes. Well, so you had mentioned, you have your story and those are important details within your story. And we're just going to start off this conversation just, pretty straightforward. So if you were to say three words that would explain what it means to be a man, what would those words be? And then can you describe or what that means?
Yeah, yeah, that question is so good. I think for me, I think of three roles that a man plays, especially within family life, but I think in general, which are leader, protector, and provider. I love all three of those. I think there's a great book out there by John Eldridge. A lot of people are familiar with Wild at Heart. He also wrote another one called Fathered by God. And in Fathered by God, he goes through these six phases of the life of a man. Things like boyhood, there's a warrior phase, a cowboy phase, or stages. He calls them stages. You have a lover's stage, there's a king stage, a sage stage. And so I think that you really kind of see how God takes us through these journeys to play those three roles through those different stages of our lives, and we kind of explore and understand what we're supposed to be. So leader to me, just to clarify as well, because I think a lot of people can hear those three roles or think about like, why wouldn't it be like love and strength? And I think the virtues all are the fuel that allow you to play those three roles. But to me, we have to have, especially men are very practically minded. We have to understand that these are the three roles I have to play. And then I think about, okay, what do I need? What are the resources, the tools, the virtues, the things that I need to play those roles effectively? And that's where a lot of the other stuff comes in. And if you don't have love, you're not going to be a good leader. You're not going to be willing to protect or die for anybody else. And you're not going to be a provider, because love is what drives you and motivates you to do all three of those things, especially to do them well. But a leader, I talk a lot about this. My favorite keynote talk that I have for men's conferences is based on leading. And it really comes back to Ephesians 5, where we hear about the headship of a man when it comes to a family, right? Being a husband and father, you're the head of the family. You're as Christ is to the church, so a husband is to his family. And what that comes down to is this combination of authority and responsibility, right? So if you're given authority, you have to be given responsibility. If you're given responsibility, you have to be given authority, because one without the other, either way, is an injustice to the person and to the people that are being led by that individual. And so um, responsibility and authority. So to me, it kind of makes the most sense when you think about Jocko Willink. He's got that great book, Extreme Ownership. That's what I think men are called to take. And so, as a man, one of my big steps in my journey as a man was to take responsibility and ownership over my life. To say, okay, I can't keep blaming my dad for my current sins, the way that I'm living my life, because for a long time I wanted to do that. Right when I've fallen into drinking, smoking, using women, it was like, well, this is what I'd seen growing up. This is what I was exposed to. Like nobody ever formed me. And a lot of that's true and it can be true. But at a certain point, you have to say, okay, I still have to take responsibility for who I am, for what I'm doing, how I'm living my life. And I have to pursue wisdom that's going to help me to turn things around and live a Christ-centered life. And so that's kind of the first big one. And then I think for protection, that's obvious. Obviously, in the physical sense, I'm called to be the protector of my family. I ensure that we have our security system. We have a gun in our house. Like there's some practical aspects of that, right? So I try to stay physically fit. I think being physically fit is a great deterrent for just being a protector, because you're less likely to have somebody try to cause any issues. But I think that there's also a very spiritual aspect to that. And so me, am I staying in a state of grace? I've heard many times before of when a man, a husband, father falls into mortal sin, like you're just opening the floodgates into the home, right? That we were kind of the first line of defense. And so am I staying spiritually strong? Am I praying over my family? Am I blessing my wife and my children? All of that is important as well. And then you also have even just ideologies, right? So you think about your home. How am I protecting my home, my kids, my wife? Not sheltering them, saying like you can't hear anything from the outside world, right? But how do I form them in a way that they can identify truth and they can disregard the lies that the devil, lies that will come up from within them, and then lies that the world will tell them as well. And then the last one is just providing. So our podcast episode that came out on this day of recording is about this, because we're talking about my wife's journey to being a stay-at-home mom. But we're called, I think we lose this a lot in society today. We don't like to talk about a lot of the older church teachings that don't fit as well in today's world. But I love St. John Chrysostom. He's one of my favorites. And so reading his book on family and marriage life, he just really reiterates what you also will see in the Council of Trent and a lot of the old writings on what it means to be a husband, father, what it means to be a man, is that the head is to provide for the members of the body, and that we are meant to provide for the physical, the spiritual, the practical needs, the emotional needs. There's a lot that's encapsulated there, but a very real part of that is like putting food on the table and making sure that we have a place to live and all of that. That ties into the leadership and the responsibility of making sure that you're taking care of everything. If you're taking ownership of all of it, then you're going to be striving to make that happen. So That was a long-winded answer, but those are kind of the three words that come to mind for me.
No, that's
Sorry about
perfect.
that.
That's great. I love how you brought in, I mean, society and culture too, because that goes into my next question of like, what do you think are the main reasons, either pushed by society or just kind of has seeped into our family life that make men run from those responsibilities, that make men run from those three things?
Yeah, this was a fun one to think about. I think the first one is that men aren't shown how to embrace responsibility. And um, what's interesting about that is I'm going to hit on both mothers and fathers when it comes to that, because both I think are guilty of this. So the first one is just, similar to what I experienced in those critical years. My dad was present for a lot of my life, but 10 to 13, when you're going through puberty, you're in middle school, all of that, like those are some critical years where I really needed formed in my masculinity. I didn't have that, which led to my big fall after my conversion and all those other things. Now, again, I take responsibility for choosing to do that, but I think that a strong father, especially a Christian father in my life, could have prevented a lot of hurt in my life and the people that I hurt along the way. And so I think absent fathers is a big one. We're seeing that all over the place. We're seeing obviously increased rates and the highest rates of all time of single motherhood across all races. It's exceptionally high in the Black community, but it's also the highest as far as if I remember correctly, it's the highest it's ever been for white in the white community as well. And so absent fathers is a big one, and that obviously a lot of the times is can be put on both, but I think is most the fathers are most guilty of that. There are some circumstances where they don't know or whatever, some exceptions there, but for the most part, that's where I would put the blame on the fathers, is they're not showing and demonstrating to their sons how to embrace responsibility. Even when they're there, a lot of times you see this kind of Homer Simpson caricature of fatherhood and masculinity where they're present, but they're kind of absent still. I had friends that had dads like that when we were growing up. The second I would say is kind of the helicopter moms. And so this is a big issue in parenting today, especially in your families that only have one or two kids, because I think it's pretty impossible to helicopter 6 to 8 children, but it is very easy and extremely tempting to helicopter 1 to 2. Jordan Peterson talks about this a lot, about these women who chase their career for a long time, they get married late in life, and then they realize they want to have a child. Sometimes it's too late, but other times they're able to squeeze one, maybe two in before their childbearing years are over. And so because they only have this one, it's like I have to get this child right. And so there's just this kind of overprotection. I'm going to do everything for you. I'm going to make sure that you succeed. Nothing is your fault, and we see this kind of the self-esteem generation and things too. But you kind of have these mothers that basically, and I've seen this and can give some personal examples in my life and in the lives of friends and people that I know, where you just have these moms that, yeah, just I'm going to take care of everything for you. I remember being at a family friend's house recently, or this is like a year ago, and the mom was talking about uh, how busy she was this upcoming week and was talking about needing to take her son in to the dentist, or needing to take her son to his car and to get the oil change. And the son was 21 years old. And it's things like that where you start to see this kind of overstepping of the mother, instead of being willing to let the kid fail every now and then. And I say kid, this is a grown man by most societal standards throughout most of human history. We don't want to let them fail. We don't want to let them experience any pain or difficulty. So I think both the absent father and the helicopter mother really, yeah, really lead into a lot of that.
Mm. And you had, which is very, I actually didn't think about that, so that's a great point, the helicopter mom. But would you say that also, that's kind of a product too of the father not being either present or in his leadership role as well, right? Having the mom being
100%.
too
Yeah.
overbearing.
Yeah, I think you have a mix of it, right? So sometimes when the father is absent, you have this almost obsessiveness over the son. So if it is just a mother and a son, you have that. And me and my mom have worked through that in our own ways at times as well, because I'm her only child and she's divorced. And so there's been times where it was like her natural inclination, when you don't have a husband any longer and you have no other kids, it's like I felt like I was bearing the responsibility of like 3 kids and a husband, right? When I should have just been one of several kids and the son of somebody who is married, right? That has some other things to worry about and be concerned with. So that's one time that it can happen. The other time that it can happen can be blamed, I think, is kind of a shared blame when you have a married couple that's raising a kid, but you still have the helicopter mom. You have a dad then that is not stepping in to say, okay, you are inhibiting his masculinity, right? Which is where this family friend example I would give, they're married, and I would say that that is where he needs to step in and say, okay, you're inhibiting him actually becoming a man. It's also the mom overstepping, so it's kind of a mix of the two. The husband a lot of times can be um, disincentivized to step in to say you're inhibiting his masculinity because he's received so much negative feedback over the years when he tried to do that, right? That can start happening like when the kid's 6, 7, 8 years old and the dad's trying to do something somewhat dangerous or rough with the kid, and it's constantly like, stop it, don't do that. No, you're not allowed to do that. Like constantly this negative feedback. You think of like the nagging wife. Sometimes that is part of the cause, and other times it's just a man who's weak in his masculinity, or it's a combination of both. But yeah, they go hand in hand, and it's really no good for anyone, because usually that same type of relationship and the helicopter mother's like very seldom is there a strong marriage where that exists.
Mm, mhm. That's a good point. What knowledge can you share about, so from your own, either from your own experience or just from what you've seen in the world nowadays, like what's some knowledge that you can share about the current state of masculinity in our country that could enlighten our listeners to potentially take action?
Yeah, there's a lot. So just to give a 20-second overview of what seeking excellence is, I have basically boiled my life down to 7 main areas where I'm called to be a good steward, where I'm called to responsibility, where I'm called to excellence. Those are mental, emotional, physical, spiritual, financial, professional, and social. And I've done episodes that are basically like anti-excellence, which are showing the average state of a human being in America in 2024, or in the 2020s, let's say. And I think that that can kind of give you an insight to the average state of a man. But we, by most metrics, can see that men are doing worse than women, and boys are doing worse than girls in schools and the education system. And I can get into some of those stats. I've looked up some stats that'll kind of back that up. But just to kind of give an overview, we know this, right? The obesity rates have gotten out of control. People are in immense amounts of financial debt. We have just stats on the professional side of people being very unfulfilled in their work, a lot of quiet quitters, people who are just kind of going through the motions of their career without having any passion or drive or really any inspiration or meaning behind their work. We know that mental health has gotten substantially worse over the last 10 to 20 years. I saw a stat that I saw a while ago on this kind of review of Catholic men that we've had a 33% increase in suicide rates in men in the last decade. Most of that driven by despair, and a lot of that driven by loneliness.
Mm,
Um, so you have all of that. You have the fact that only 17% of men, of Catholic men, attend mass weekly. So you have this spiritual decline. Um, and then you have the whole social aspect, right? Politically, culturally, where it's just constantly bashing men. The rise and dominance of feminism has really led to a lot of that. And so there's all these, every area that kind of counts, right? Like men are typically doing worse in, and we as a society are doing pretty terribly in currently. And I think a lot of that has to come with our yeah, our disdain that we have for men. But I found this Pew Research study that talks about how 39% of 21-year-old men are working full time, or were working full time in 2021, compared to 64% in 1980. And I think that it seems, you would think probably that that would be because, well, now a lot more kids are in college than were back in 1980. But we also have the number of 18 to 24-year-olds enrolled in 4-year programs across the country was down 44%, down to 44% compared to 47% in 2011. And so we're seeing decreases in that too. And that accounts for 1.2 fewer young males enrolled in 4-year college programs. So you see all these different areas of life. Men are increasingly single, 60%. You found in 2023, uninterested in finding a relationship. 57% of men they surveyed were uninterested in finding a relationship. Out of that 60%, that's single. And so you're seeing like this decrease in marriage, this decrease in purpose. And Dr. Leonard Sachs has a really great book called Boys Adrift. If you ever want to go really, really deep into the topic and hear some of his stats, that'll really give some insight behind my statement about how boys are doing worse in the education system. He hits on things like pornography, video games, all these different things, and just the change in education over the years. From how Kindergarten is a big example that he gives, where kindergarten used to just kind of be fun and games and kind of getting you used to going to school. And now kindergarten is basically what second grade used to be
Yeah.
like 50 years ago, where you're supposed to be like learning letters. And it's amazing how we've changed so much in our education program and just philosophy, but we still continue to get worse and worse, right? In education and all of our stats and reading levels and math proficiency, all of that. Um, so yeah, I think some of those stats really kind of just showed the state of men when it comes to obesity, mental health, spiritual things are definitely not looking good. And so we have to be more intentional. I think Dr. Sachs is doing a lot of great work to try to do that in the public sphere, but we need to increasingly talk about this and address it within the church as well.
Mm-hmm. And when you think of those issues and things, obviously there's things that men can do, right? To help change. I mean, you made steps to help yourself change and grow. Um, well, can you actually go? We'll start there. Can you explain maybe the first few steps a man could take to, start embracing truly his masculinity, and then I'll go into the next part of that question.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good question. So I think the first thing you have to do when you want to make any type of change in your life is take stock of where you're currently at. I always use the land navigation in the army kind of analogy when it comes to this is when you're out in the woods, even if you're lost, right? If you just wake up kind of dazed and confused, you're out in the woods and you have a map, then you have to try to find some type of landmark, right? A mountain, a lake, a river, a road that can help you to identify on the map where you're at. Because if you don't know where you're at, even if you pick your ideal destination on the map, if you don't know where you are, you can't chart any path to get there. And so that's a big part. The map, in this analogy is actual wisdom. And so I think pursuing that wisdom, reading things like Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life, obviously reading scripture, reading good Catholic books, listening to good Catholic podcasts, attending men's conferences where you're finding this stuff. But I think that framework of the 7 pillars for me has always been really helpful as well, because I can take stock of where I'm at and I can pursue wisdom and education and formation in those areas where I'm weakest. And then start to create a plan that I can get better in that area. And so let's say for example physical fitness, right? So I get into college, and like I had never, I mean, even really when I got into the army, I had never done like back squatting, I had never deadlifted. Like there was a lot of like just kind of typical exercises, powerlifting exercises I had never done before. I had definitely never cleaned or snatched or done any of that. And so I had to learn all of those things, and I had kind of like some good foundations because I was pretty fit from just doing army stuff. But still had to say, okay, I'm going to be humbled here, even though I thought that I was in good shape, even though I thought that I was strong. I need to be humble and seek out these other people who are doing these types of exercises, who are beyond where I am, and start to spend time with them and ask them to teach me how to do these things. Humility is so important when you're starting out, because I do the same when I got onto campus. And I told you before, I see these people who are living joyful lives. They're more fulfilled. They have peace. They have just a way about them that I wanted. And so I had my sophomore year like 5 spiritual directors. I was meeting with a focused student. I was meeting with a focused missionary. I was meeting with a focused team director. I was meeting with our chaplain of ROTC. I was meeting with the vice rector of the seminary at the Mount. And some of them once a month, some of them once a week. And I was just like asking all of my questions and telling them about my prayer life and telling them this is what I'm doing. What could I be doing better? And just seeking. I was just so hungry to learn about it. A third example I'll give you is finances. I get into the army. I go to ranger school for 6 months, and now suddenly I come out. I don't know what I had, $15,000-$20,000 saved up, and I'm like, what do I do with $20,000? A year ago I had $300 to my name. Had never had more than, let's say, $1,000, and now I have $25,000 saved up in cash, and I'm like, what do I do with this? Should I go buy a Mustang? Should I go on vacation? Like, I don't know. What do I do? And so that's when I found some people. I read Rich Dad Poor Dad. I started reading, and listening to Dave Ramsey, and started to learn a lot about, okay, what can I do with my money to make good decisions here? And so when you come to a place where you don't know what to do, I think having the humility to either ask, Google, research, do those types of things, because especially as young men, we have to invest into ourselves. You have to be willing to say, okay, maybe I won't be able to go out as much, but I need to hire a personal trainer. Maybe I won't be able to, scroll YouTube or watch sports as much, but I need to go through Dave Ramsey's Financial Peace University. You can start to gain this knowledge in all these different 7 pillars so that you can be a better version of yourself and be a better leader and influence on your family later in life.
Mm, that's great. And I love how you're bringing in that aspect of like seeking out advice too, and like looking for
Yeah.
the people. So do you have anyone in particular that in the midst of this kind of rebuilding your life, I guess I would say like that really you had a lot of different mentors, like spiritual directors as well. But was there anyone in particular who was um I'm gonna pause for a second because I have 10 minutes left on this thing. Um let me let me think. Okay. Do you you can answer this question and can I stop the Zoom and resume it after you answer this
Sure.
question? Okay.
Yeah.
So the question was about if you have a mentor, and I'll just slice this up, all that good stuff after the fact.
Yeah, that's fine.
Great. Awesome.
No
Thank you.
problem. Yeah, it's hard to put, a finger on one person who was kind of the difference maker. There's so many people that come to mind. From some of the people I already mentioned. Another one that was really big for me was Sergeant First Class Hollingsworth, who was just huge and bringing me into ROTC and just believing in me and challenging me and holding me to a high standard that I thought was ridiculous. Probably one of the first people in my life, honestly, to hold me to a really high standard that I thought was just kind of out of this world. But I've been so blessed, and I tell people a lot of times that you should pray for that. You should pray for people who can come into your life and mentor you, people who can come into your life and give you guidance and perspective that you never had before. But there's one story I thought about this because another another thing we talked about in preparing was just like what's one thing women can do and women can't do. And I tell this story sometimes when I have a certain talk that I give on masculinity. Is this story of Staff Sergeant Partika. And so I met him when we were doing I had like a summer training program basically where I was stationed at Fort Bliss in Texas. And I was with this infantry unit for like a month. And it was my first time really being exposed, like truly, to like active duty infantry culture, which is like, I mean, football locker room meets, like police academy meets like fire hall. Like it's just, very masculine, toxic in a lot of ways. And I always say that the army is very strong in its virtues and it's very strong in its vices. They're just living in the extremes of both. And so the things that it's really good at, it's really good at. Things that the culture is bad at, it's really bad about. But there's just one conversation that I had with him that was really, really monumental in my life. And he and I were kind of sitting on the couch in the office one day, and he was asking me about what branch I wanted to go after college. And so I was like, yeah, I think I might want to go armor, which is kind of like think tanks and there's cavalry. So I was like, maybe I'll be like a Cav Scout, which is what Sergeant Hollingsworth was, which is why it was so appealing to me. So they're kind of like recon guys, and then you have military intelligence. And I was kind of naming all these different things. I was like, maybe infantry, but I don't know. And he just looked at me dead in my face and he said, "Are you an alpha male?" And I was like, I don't know. I've never had anybody ask me that before. And in my mind, I'm like, what do you think? I was like, I don't know. And he said, "Well, I think you are. I think you should go infantry. I think you can do it." And it was from that moment on that I was like, all right, I have to give it a go. I have to try it. I have to try to see if I can go infantry. I was nervous, to be honest with you. I was nervous and almost scared of going infantry because infantry is the only branch where you have to graduate from Ranger School, depending on what unit you're going to. But I knew I wanted to go to the 82nd. So if you're going to get a platoon, which is like the entire purpose and goal of ROTC is to be a platoon leader someday. If you're going to get it, you have to graduate from Ranger School, which is the basically premier leadership um, training program in the special operations schools. And so you have like Navy SEALs that go there, Green Berets. There's like all kinds of different branches will send their guys to Ranger School. And so I was nervous about it, but it was having somebody like him, which is a role I hope to play in the lives of other men. That looked me in my face and said, I think that, you can get into some weird alpha male stuff when it comes to, Andrew Tate and the likes, but it was still helpful to have somebody who I respected at the time. He was an absolute stud. I mean, he was Ranger qualified sniper. He'd done all kinds of things like 4 deployments. He was like in some crazy grad school program and dropped out of college during after 9/11 and just enlisted and just wanted to go basically avenge America. And so having him, who was just the absolute stud, look me in my face and be like, "You can do this." Um, yeah, I still think about it all the time. So he was definitely impactful. I don't know if I can give him the number one spot, but he definitely made a big impact.
Yeah, no, that's really cool too, because it's important. I mean, I think it's very important for women. We like to be affirmed by our husbands and then also by other women because we tend to compare ourselves. But for men, I'm sure it's way more impactful to have a man say, "Hey, yeah, you can do this," you know, I believe in
Yep.
a certain sense, but not, a little less mushy,
Certainly.
but. That's
Yep.
great.
Yeah, you
Wow.
have to have it.
Yeah. Okay, so then after considering like your one kind of person that has influenced you, um, what could you say, oh, like women can do that can help men to be truly masculine? Now, this is a more general women, I would say, and like in the workplace or in friendship or in dating, what are some ways that women can
Sure.
be more masculine?
Yeah. No, I think it's really important on the general side. And this kind of goes back to one of my I did this episode like 3 to 6 months ago that was called my hottest takes in Catholic dating.
Oh,
And one of the things I shared, a lot of people are very interested to know what the hot takes are, but one of them was basically saying that uh, I think a lot of times we give men get a bad rap for the fact that there's not a lot of men present in Catholic parishes today, right? And I think you probably have some single friends, if I had to guess. I think most young Catholic women do have some disgruntled single friends. And the question or the pretty frequent complaint is there's just no good Catholic guys. There's not the normal good Catholic men in my parish. And I think that a large part of that problem is uh or a large part of the blame is to be put on our moms and our grandmothers' generation. And I think that they allowed feminism and feminist ideas to be just pushed through the church. And you started to see things like girl altar servers. You go to a parish where I'm from in Harris, Pennsylvania, where I say that literally growing up, or even when I go back home now, you go to mass and it's usually I mean, if you can get a moderately masculine priest, then you're in good hands, but it's pretty rare to even get that where you'd rate him like a 5 or 6 out of 10. Usually a fairly effeminate priest. You have a female cantor. You'll have women lecturing. You have girl altar servers. And so you're sitting there. If you're a young boy, all the young boys in the crowd are usually forced to be there, and they're disinterested in what's going on because you think to yourself, okay, I either have to be a priest, and I don't respect this priest, so I don't really want to be like him, or I have to be a woman, or I really don't belong here, or I have to be a child, right? Like that's basically what the Catholic faith is for. And so I think that the hard part for women a lot of times, and that's a hard thing to hear for a lot of women. My wife was an altar server as a kid, right? Her family wouldn't do it again now. They've had sense of change of heart on that, and we just went to a parish where her sister's baby just got baptized this past weekend. We were the godparents, and they had 25 young boys altar serving. The priest that said our wedding is for Father Jonathan Meyer in Indiana, and he has a very similar parish and they do things very similarly, very Orthodox mass. It's very beautiful. You have incense, you have beautiful music, you have strong and beautiful and challenging homilies. The priest is a man, and you know that, you can feel that, while still being loving and kind and gentle when needed. But you see that, you see the impacts of that. You see the fact that both of these parishes are talking about their vocations that are coming from it. And a lot of times I think that women don't want to step back. They don't want to release control in order to have the things that they ultimately want, which is a lot of times what God forces us to do, right? We've all seen the image of like Jesus holding the big teddy bear behind his back, right, and asking the little girl to give her little teddy bear. Like I think that it's very fitting to me that it's a little girl in that photo because I think that so often that is exactly what happens in the church. It's just like, okay, you want your daughters to be able to be altar servers, great. You want to be able to read or do the things that men can do, that's good. What you want more than that is to have masculine men, is you want to have good husbands. You want to have great fathers. You want to have your sisters, your younger sisters or your daughters to have options in the church to have good men that they can marry, right? Like all these things are much bigger than just having this little preference of like, oh, I just want to be able to read. I want to be able to participate in mass. And I'm not saying that they can't ever do that, but when you start to see a parish that has all of those things, usually it's on the decline. Usually, there's very few full parishes that have standing room only, that have women doing everything except for what the priest could do, right? It's just the reality of it, I think, in America today. And I think there's a reason for that. And I use the church example to lead into the friendships and the other relationships, which will lead into marriage. Is just that you have, I'll use a marriage example here, but it can be applied to friendships or mother's sons or anything. Where we had friends that just got married recently, and the wife, I shouldn't say let the husband, but their situation was the husband planned the entire honeymoon and didn't tell the wife anything. It was like it was his a total surprise. It wasn't like a controlling thing, but it was just meant to be a surprise. And she's a pretty, used to being a pretty controlling woman, and so she recognized that it'd be good kind of marriage prep for her to kind of release control. But that's what has to happen in friendships, in mother-son relationships. You have to be able to, going back to the dentist appointment or the oil change, you got to be willing to let them miss the appointment, right? Like you have to be willing to let things, like the consequences, actually happen if you're going to see men rise to the occasion. A lot of times, Tucker Carlson even has this great quote that I love, where he was asked about young men and having families, and how he believes that the solution to a lot of the apathy and laziness and unmotivated young men is to have families and get married, because he says that his quote says that young men won't do anything until they have to, but when they have to, they'll do anything to provide and make things happen. Now, it's not true for all of them, but I think 80% of men are that way. And that's kind of the situation, is a lot of times women are just so busying themselves. And you can sit there in the parish and say, well, we already have plenty of electors. We already have plenty of this or that. And women are quick to fill that role because that's what women do, right? They're kind of just in tune to, well, father needs a lector, father needs this, father needs that. So I'm going to step up and do it because nobody else is doing it. Sometimes the best thing women can do is just pause, sit in that discomfort of letting things be undone, and let the friend, the boyfriend, the son make decisions and lead and actually do things, and trying to do things that can help support them and free them up to do the things that are most important in their life. Encouraging them and appreciating and acknowledging their hard work, recognizing this is going to be an overlap too with marriage, is recognizing that respect is greater than love in the minds of the vast majority of men. There's that great book called Love and Respect where it talks about that. And men don't want to hear, whether it's friends or whatever, just like these nice kind of fluffy things, but just being like, I admired how hard you worked on that thing. I respected how much you put into that. I respected the way that you bounced back after this failure or after that breakup or whatever it is, whatever kind of hardship they're going through. Recognizing their strength, recognizing their masculine virtues instead of trying to placate and comfort their feminine side, is going to do a lot more for helping men to be masculine than anything else.
Mm. And you kind of went into the next question, is like specifically how wives can help their husbands, and kind of just, I'm sure all those things that you just said now are applicable for wives as well, but is there anything in particular that maybe you've experienced with your wife, newly married and all that, or that you can share with the women who listen to this podcast as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, yeah, marriage is a beautiful thing. It's a trying thing. It's a, it's an incredible ride. I'm excited for you, to get to experience it. Um, but yeah, I think all of it does apply. The love and respecting becomes much, much more important within a marriage. I think there's a lot of wives who don't recognize that. Another great thing that came out of that book, or I can never remember if it's for women only and for men only. There's like a two for book that I encourage couples to read, and then there's Love and Respect, and there's several others that we've read. I think it's Love and Respect though that talks about how men's uh what crying is for women is a lot of times what yelling is for men. And I can't stress that enough. And I think that if every woman would just embrace like 10% of that truth, and realize that when a husband or a man in your life is expressing anger, especially at you or especially at the relationship or something that transgressed, that a lot of times is the way that he's expressing his hurt in the disrespect that he felt during that time, which is the equivalent for him of a woman crying to her husband because of something he did or said, because of how unloved she felt in the thing that he did or said that hurt her. It's almost, I mean, I think I truly, I don't want to say I'm pessimistic about women's ability to grasp that, but I think that it's just so hard because women just hate being yelled at. Or like I have so many friends, I mean, I've talked about marriage and stuff with so many friends, and then in my own experience, it's just like any intensity, any sternness is just constantly usually met with tears. And then a lot of times what happens in a marriage is then it gets flipped back onto what the husband did to hurt the wife. And then what I see happen frequently is that the husband's needs or feelings of hurt never really get addressed because he expresses it in a way that causes tears, and then the tears take precedence over the anger. Um, but it's very rare. I don't know many men. I know my wife will tell you she's seen me cry probably twice. And that was after, not even on our wedding day, during the wedding day. It was our last dance we did after everybody left. And then the moment my son was born, like that was the most like, yeah, that was the craziest one for me that I like had no impulse control. It just like actually lost it. Which is a lot to say on both of those things. Maybe one other time. Oh, there was one movie we watched. That's right. Yeah, she says that's the third time, um, which is funny. But I think that is important to recognize is that a lot of times I'm not going to cry. I've never, all that to say, like I've never cried in an argument with her about like this thing you did hurt me. It made me so sad. I'm going to cry now in front of you.
Yeah.
It almost never happens. Another thing that I think happens a lot of times in marriage is, and this is something we talk about a lot and we've gotten better at, but we still, have our moments with it, is like, I actually thought about this more practically in you asking this question when I was thinking through it, is we think so often men get the advice. We always get told like sometimes a woman just wants to vent. She doesn't want you to fix her problem, right? What's never thought about on the other side is that women, sometimes your man wants to help you fix a problem.
Mm,
So the other side of that, if you care about his needs as well, is coming to him with an issue, asking for his advice, and implementing that advice. I think a lot of times it's like, okay, men just have to shut up and not fix the problem. So we sit there and we'll listen to you vent. I think a lot of men who have heard that can say, okay, I know that moment. I can enter into that moment next time and stop and sit and say, and sometimes we'll even ask. I think the wisest among us will say, is this a venting moment or are you looking for a solution, right? And you can kind of get that feedback real time so you can know, what the vibe is. But I think the other side of it truly is to sometimes come and say, okay, I'm going to ask you for your opinion and I'm going to actually do what you suggest, not asking you for your opinion and then just poke holes in it and say how dumb it is or why I shouldn't do that, because that doesn't help. And I think when you're a man who consistently just either just gets talked at and gets problems dumped on you, with no ability to give feedback, or you get asked your feedback and then it's not implemented, not used because it's not the way the wife would do it. It's very emasculating and it's defeating over time. And if you want to have a man, if ladies, you want to have a man who will stop taking initiative, will stop doing things, just criticize every time he does. And I think that's one of my favorite things for marriage that Jordan Peterson says is you never punish somebody when they do the thing you want them to do,
mm,
right? And I think that you see that a lot of times in a man unloads the dishwasher or takes initiative to do this or that, and it's like you do it the wrong way. And it's one thing to give feedback, but just it's probably not the first time that it happens. It's probably not the time to give feedback. The first time that he takes initiative doing that thing, just say thank you for doing that, right? And you just fix it and kind of make the adjustment. The third time, maybe you say, hey, just by the way, this actually goes over here, just so you know. I just was looking for it the other day, I couldn't find it, right? But I think a lot of times it's this need, it's the same thing, right? But just in different circumstances. So like we have to fix it immediately. You actually don't have to. And if you want your husband or wife to do something, criticizing it the first time is not the move. Same thing goes, if you have a man who has a wife that doesn't like to cook and she makes dinner one time and then he says, oh, this is really bad. It's like, no, whatever it is the first time, if you want her to start making dinner, you just eat it. And
yeah,
you're just
yeah,
happy. You thank her for making it. Maybe the third time you say, hey, can we add some salt and pepper to the chicken next time?
yeah.
It was a little dry, you know? So I think that's a really big thing too.
Mm, yeah. And I think ultimately that's like the whole idea of just communication and communicating well. Like when a woman doesn't
Yeah.
communicate well, she bursts into tears. When a man is not communicating well, he probably gets angry and because it's hard to. I find that it's hard to like express all the things you want to express in the moment, and then you kind of get lost in all the details and everything, and it's a mess. So it's um, as we've been taking marriage prep, it's a lot of you know expressing the feeling, saying I feel this when you do this. Can you please do this? Or like there's that formula of
Yeah.
the figuring out the conflict.
Yeah.
So
And those things feel cheesy and corny, but they can be
yeah,
really, really helpful. A lot of people say like that can make it boring or whatever. And it's like those practical things that are boring and seem lame are really, really helpful.
yeah, and
Really
there's
helpful.
and
Yeah.
you think, oh, it's so simple, it's not going to work, but in reality, actually it does.
Yeah. Absolutely. No, you're spot on.
Yeah. So then kind of to wrap up the conversation, when men embrace their true identity as men, embracing that masculinity, what effect does that have on their children? You talked about it a little earlier with your relationship and with your experience with your dad, but like now as a father, how does your masculinity and your embracing that really affect, how could you see it affecting your children, or how have you heard it has affected children?
Yeah. I think there's a lot of ways, but I think one is that's very obvious and kind of data driven is the faith passes on. We see that there's some great research on this. You can look up they did all these different kind of demographics or situations, seeing which one had the most likelihood of passing on the faith of their children, right? So it was like both mom and dad go to mass every Sunday. Then it was like dad goes sometimes, mom goes every Sunday. Dad goes never, mom goes every Sunday. And I think the most interesting takeaway from it was that children were more likely to go to mass every weekend when they were adults if dad went to mass sometimes and mom never went, than if mom went to mass all the time and dad didn't go. And so you see this big disparity in how much the impact and the example of the father has on the adoption of the faith, which means the adoption of the values, right? So if you're trying to pass on Christian values to your children, which is also really, really important, not just going to mass, right? Nobody wants to have kids that just grow up and just go to mass, but believe and promote all these anti-Catholic things. Like that's not obviously it. Nobody would say that if Nancy Pelosi type of Catholic was your your daughter when she's 60. Like I wouldn't view that as a success just because she still goes to mass, right? And so you want to be able to pass on these values. And I think the reason why those values get passed on is when a man embraces his masculinity, then I just believe that the more you embrace your masculinity, the more you strive for excellence in all those areas that I named before. Even if you don't end up wealthy, even if you're not, with a six pack, but you're just trying, right? You just occasionally are disciplined. You have a healthy relationship with food. You're active. You're not lazy. You work hard, whether you're making a lot of money or you're not. You're at least working hard and trying to steward it well. You're intentional with your relationships. You're intentionally trying to pour into other people. You think about other people more than you think about yourself. You're mentally strong. You're mentally tough. They can see that at funerals or during hardships that you're somebody that other people rely on for strength, not somebody that is constantly in need of a crutch from somebody else. You are emotionally intelligent, right? You treat your wife, their mother, very well. All these different things, right? When you have all of that, then that's how you become, I think, that staff sergeant partika within your own home, right? You have all those qualifications that when you tell your son or your daughter who they are, which we can even think back to the baptism of Jesus in the Jordan River. You are my son with whom I am well pleased, right? The voice from the heavens, the God the Father saying that to Jesus Christ. That's how Jesus knows who he is. Jesus obviously knew who he is. Jesus was God, but we still have that example there of the identity passing from the Father to the Son. Um, we have that uh, just that powerful moment of being able to tell somebody who they are, being able to encourage them. That is why we should strive for excellence, not just because of the joy and the fulfillment that it gives me, that it gives to oneself, but also just the ability to actually be an impact maker in other people's lives. When you're doing those things, when you're striving to be your best, even though you'll have mistakes, you own them, you apologize for them, and you move on from them and you grow and try to learn and get better. When you do that, then you'll be able to have what my dream is, and the question that you asked me earlier, who was the one person that taught you how to be a man? If we weren't on camera right now, I'd probably get emotional thinking about how, and I probably will on my flight later on today when I'm thinking about this again, is when you ask Jordan Crankfield when he's 30 years old, who is it that taught you how to be a man? I'm getting chills thinking about it. I pray to God that he'll be able to say, there was a lot of positive influences in my life. We had a lot of great family friends, but my dad was the example to me. My dad was my hero. My dad was the one that showed me what it looked like to work hard, what it looked like to take responsibility. And even though my dad didn't have the best example in his life, he strove to break those chains, to break the cycle of despair, of apathy, of ignorance in our family, so that I can have the life that I have and be the man that I am. That's what I hope. And so every man should want that, and we should want that for women. When if we have daughters someday, and they say, "How'd you know what to look for in a good man?" I say, "Well, I have one at home, and my dad."
Oh, it's beautiful. Yeah, I got chills. So
Yeah,
beautiful.
it's
Um,
good stuff.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you for sharing your wisdom and your knowledge and your expertise, and really pray that, when you continue talking and producing your podcast, that it goes really well. How can you share with us where we can find you, where our listeners can find you, what other things you're doing?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, thank you. So, I post most on Instagram and LinkedIn. So I post pretty frequently on LinkedIn, different things, mostly focused on professional excellence, but I do share at least once a week something more geared towards fatherhood, usually on Wednesdays. So that's kind of the St. Joseph day of
Mm,
the week. And so I post on LinkedIn, and it's just my name, Nathan Crankfield, on there. And then I have Instagram, which is at Nathan Crankfield. I have a Seeking Excellence one that posts podcast clips on there, also on YouTube. And so I have a YouTube channel that's under Seeking Excellence. But if you just search Seeking Excellence on YouTube, it'll come up. And I have videos that I post once a week on YouTube that are different than the podcast episode. So both the podcast episode and YouTube have content. And I would encourage, especially for this topic, Seeking Excellence with Nathan Crankfield is the podcast. But if you like this, then the YouTube videos are more directly towards men. The podcast, we, like I said today, was an interview with my wife, and we were talking about marriage and stay-at-home moms and all that stuff. And I talk about political and cultural topics and a lot of practical things on there as well. But the YouTube videos are shorter and meant to be more practical in how someone can become a good man, more specifically. So yeah, that's pretty much it. And then nathancrankfield.com is the website, but that's plenty. That's plenty of things there.
that's great. Well, I'll include that in the show notes. So,
Thank you so much.
yeah, thank you so much. I have one last question for you. And this is
Let's
kind of
hear
a
it.
bonus question. I might cut it from, but so it's the
Okay.
we're trying to build devotion to Mary through this title, but I am curious, how in your life has Mary been a mother to you?
Man, it's a really good question. One of my favorite stories, and it's kind of a compilation of stories, but a thing I used to do when I was a kid. I told you I became Catholic when I was 13, and we had like a secret Santa shop when I was like 6 or 7. Um, 8 years old in school, and I would bring my mom home, my Lutheran mom, these like little Marian things. I thought they were really cool, and I was always drawn to her, and just hearing about yeah, Jesus' relationship with his mother, and me having this kind of strained, difficult relationship with my dad. It was a very easy thing for me. I talked about John Eldridge earlier in his book Father by God, and that book was really the turning point. And this is when I was like 23, when I started to like really have a relationship with God the Father, because my relationship with my earthly father was so strained. But in all of that time, Mary was a huge, huge part of my life and continues to be to this day, of course. But I think the most important moments for me, and it's funny because I was actually my main time I get emotional is in prayer, and it happens somewhat frequently. But I was praying this morning in the church next door where I work. I run an office at a parish, but there's a church next door, and I was praying. I actually had my iPad with me because I was preparing for a retreat that I'm leading tomorrow, and something just prompted me to watch the video clip of the Passion of the Christ, where Mary runs to Jesus as he's falling. And if you remember that from the movie, there's like a back and forth between Jesus being a boy and him on the day of his passion. And the what came to mind was just this recollection, this reflection, which is where Mary was most important in my life, is this image of Mary running to us every time we fall. We fall into sin and you feel abandoned and you feel like you've rejected God and you've said no to God and you've broken your relationship with him, especially with mortal sin, which happened to me just constantly, especially through my college years where I was having this just flood of spiritual warfare where the Holy Spirit and God were really pursuing me and the devil was really pursuing me as well. I always say it's because both of them knew that whoever won me would have somebody who was going to be an evangelist for them, right? I was very influential in sin and promoting sin, and I was very influential in promoting goodness. And so I had a lot of that, and I felt like Mary, every time that I fell away and felt like I couldn't come back, I couldn't pray, I could still go to the church and just kind of spend time with her. And it wasn't that I couldn't spend time with God the Father or with Jesus, but she was just always for me the approachable one
Mm,
who would run to me when I fell, pick me up, and help me to go back to her son and to embrace him in confession and all of that. So, huge role in my life. I have a weird relationship where I haven't been as devoted or consistent with praying the rosary in my life as I should, but have always felt like I've had a really strong relationship with Mary, and she's always been super important in my life. So,
beautiful. Perfect. Thank you so much for being on the show.
yeah, thank you for having me. This is awesome. I really, really enjoyed it.